We're here to make a new type of news.
New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation.
Making news just for you. It's July 28th here in Seoul. I'm Shin-Yoon, and this is News Generation, where we make the news at Arirang's very own open studio. Every morning, we'll discuss the top issues and latest current affairs affecting people in their 20s and 30s. Joining me in the studio is Chiji.
Happy Friday!
Happy Friday! And Walter Lee.
Lovely to be here.
Now, both are here to speak on behalf of people in their 20s and 30s. Today, we're going to be talking about a common way people, especially youngsters in Korea, aim to grow their assets or simply invest. To find out what we'll talk about, take a look at the screen. Here in Korea, there's a so-called house subscription system. It's the government's way of allocating households to mostly first-time buyers who've had a subscription savings account for a long time. It's a good investment opportunity for people as they save money for a long time and also have a higher chance of landing an apartment. For officials, it helps them regulate the supply of apartments. And recently, the system of saving up to apply for a house subscription funded by the government has gained much attention here in Korea. Ji-hee, could you tell us a bit more about this and how this house subscription system works and why it has recently sparked a lot of attention, especially among young people like ourselves?
Sure. So the house subscription merit system, they say, is a unique regulation system here in the country. It's for the allocation of new apartments. So when a developer builds apartments, the customers are selected, usually before the program is completed, according to the government rules. And it's very unique to Korea because, like Walter said earlier, you don't have the system in Australia, right? Anyway, so the selection criteria give the priority to first-time buyers, to large families, and also to people who have owned a subscriptions savings account, which we'll talk about later on in more detail, for a long time. And the system has two merits, basically. So first, it's to contribute to financing the construction of the apartments. And secondly, the system is a strong incentive for people, candidates, to save money in order to pay for a house later on after they obtain it. And recently, 2 additional units of an apartment in 흑석ja이 were offered for sale, attracting over 900,000 people.
Wow.
And most of them were millennials and Gen Zs in the country. And some winners said they were born in 1989 even, not very far away from how...
1998 too.
1989.
89?
Yes, 89.
Wasn't there a very younger one too?
I think there was a younger one too, but many of them were in their 1980s, like this. And as housing prices have become more expensive due to inflation and rising commodities, some apartments that have maintained their original selling price are popularly called Lotto, lottery subscriptions, because they will eventually increase in the future in value, and the owner will be gaining that much more asset in the end.
Right. I think the biggest merit behind this is it gives a lot of youngsters, including myself, some hope that we might get the lottery.
Yeah.
And the lottery being having a house here in Seoul, Korea, which we've mentioned so many times on our show, seems to be quite impossible. And given that, do you guys have your own subscription savings account? And is there a similar concept like this abroad?
Well, I do not. I was advised by my bank not to get one because there are certain technicalities. As a person who is not a Korean citizen, I'm an Australian citizen, there are some technicalities that may not make it worth it to get it. But my wife decides all my finances anyway because all my money goes to her and I hope she's spending them well. Anyway, however, my wife does have one. She's had one for about 20 years now. And as far as abroad goes, now I've always used Australia as my sort of, examples because that's where I grew up. I don't think they do. I've been living in Korea for about 10 years now, so it might have changed between then and now, but I don't think so because this also may be due to the population here within Korea, how we have so many people, but yet, and to be honest with you, a lot of apartments, but it's very difficult to get an apartment. However, if you compare it to Australia, Australia don't actually have many apartments and they would rather look for houses and property rather than actually go and rent an apartment into the city because it's extremely expensive and it's more worth it to go for houses. So I don't think they have one in Australia, know.
In Australia, is there a tendency like Korea where people try to live closer to the capital?
Obviously, the closer the better, but then the closer you are, the more expensive it is. And in Australia, since we do mainly have to drive from work to everywhere, basically, there is public transport systems, but Australia is such a big country, we usually drive, so people are willing to go out a little bit just to save some money. Like a 20-minute drive is fine, a 30-minute drive is fine, an hour's drive is fine. But yeah, it's not like here in South Korea.
Yeah, maybe it's because we have one of the best public transport systems in the world, and a lot of people just want to live in this concentrated, bustling city because there's everything. There's entertainment, there's education, your workplace is nearby, and that's why a lot of subscription saving account subscribers are hyping their chances to land a house in Seoul. And I'm curious, Jihi, do you have one?
I do. I've had one since 2010, so it's been about 13 years. I initially started putting in 20,000 won in the beginning, but the max is 100,000 won.
So 20,000 won in dollars is around
$15, right?
That's not too much, though.
It's not too much.
So little by little.
A little by little at first, but now I've been putting in 100,000 won.
Wow, five times
is,
more.
Yeah, 5 times more. And that's the maximum you can get. And I'm not very knowledgeable at this whole system. However, you can only win this subscription just once in your life, right? So I really want to learn it more, study it more, and raise the chance of obtaining an apartment in the future.
Because it's just so difficult.
It is.
And why do you think a lot of millennials and Gen Z in Korea are invested in this type of subscription system? I think a lot of my friends, even myself, I didn't really know about it, but then my parents said, hey, you need to be studying this to land a house. What about
you? Do you have a bank account?
I do.
I do. That's good.
But it didn't start with me researching. It was more of, hey,
do it.
Oh, do it. You have to do it.
Right. It was like that for me too. Anyway, so the subscription rate has increased tremendously. That's mainly because of the explosion of housing prices. It's become more difficult for us, the young people, to buy a house, especially because the housing prices rose so much during the COVID-19 pandemic. It used to be possible for the older generation to buy an apartment if they saved up their money, their salary, but it's now almost impossible for a regular salary earner to get a house, and without a subscription, really. So they also see real estate as an investment because the growth rate of apartment prices in Seoul is enormous. In the recent few years, we've seen such a huge increase in the real estate, although they're going down right now. However, the younger generation also complain about this whole subscription system because they're saying that it's only for the rich kids or the trust fund babies who are born into rich families, because while the income limit is very low, the apartment prices are so high, so only those who are born into a rich family can really afford it, although they win the subscription and get an apartment.
Though it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for you to get nominated for the subscription, if you don't have the money to actually go inside the house, some people are saying it's not fair. There should be better welfare policies to allow a more populated younger generation to even try this out in the first place. What about you, Walter? Why do you think millennials and Gen Z in Korea are invested into this type of subscription system?
Well, I do think that Jihi basically touched upon everything, but I will add on to her last point. I mean, these days there's actually a trend of people moving out of Seoul because Seoul apartments are just so expensive and people can't afford them. Like, as the price of owning one's own apartment in Seoul is almost impossible, I feel like, these days, unless you are part of that rich family or you have a very well background. Now, according to Statistics Korea, in a total of 406,975 people moved away from Seoul, moving to areas like Gyeonggi-do region and also Incheon, just because it was just too expensive to live within Seoul, even with this account. So we briefly talked on the show about Wolte and Chonse, right?
Yeah.
And it's also ridiculously high here in Seoul. So it's not just, trying to buy your own house, but just living in Seoul in general is becoming close to impossible.
And as you mentioned, a lot of young adults in Korea have basically given up on buying an apartment, especially in Seoul, because prices have risen exponentially. Living costs and house prices seem to be rising, but our salary seems to be the same. Nonetheless, a lot of young people are still trying to subscribe to this housing savings account, and at the end of the day, they do want to land their own real estate because they think it's a really good investment opportunity. Would you like to elaborate more on this phenomenon?
Sure. I mean, like you said, it's become near impossible for us, the young people, to get a home here in the country. But many young people still do want to own their own home. If we take a look at the screen together, the main reasons the younger generation really want their own real estate include things like because they want to get married or seeing real estate as an investment and wanting to increase their assets. But the number one reason, which accounts for more than 80%, as you see on the chart, is for a stable life. I mean, many youngsters, including myself and Walter here, he's living in a chonse. I'm sorry if it was too personal,
No.
you were going to mention that you're moving soon. I mean, we require to find new homes and move to new places once every year or once in 2 years. But if you have your own home, there's no need to live like a nomad, and you can definitely feel a lot more stable.
And Chiki, you did mention Walter's situation, but Walter, if you'd like to elaborate, though a lot of youngsters are moving away from Seoul, where everything seems to be here, they still want their own real estate property, right?
Right, that's correct. And thank you for calling me a youngster, Chi, because I feel like an
You
oldie. But yes, I also live on Chonse, and the amount of money that we have to pay for a decent apartment is ridiculous. And Chonse is also ridiculous to save up. I mean, if people don't know, just to remind you, it's kind of like a security deposit, but it's a large amount. I mean, going from Australia to here was a big culture shock, as in Australia, if you want to rent an apartment, it's 2 weeks worth of rent, and then you just pay normally. But here, you have to pay almost like you're buying the house just to rent the house. It's absolutely insane. I was so shocked.
But you're getting it back at least later.
Let's hope so, right? So, like, only next week I am actually moving, so it's sort of good timing that I'm here. But because my contract is up, and like Tahi mentioned, it's kind of it feels unstable to be always moving every 2 years. Regardless of like whether you may enjoy it, but like moving, nobody likes moving. It takes a lot of time. It's a lot of effort. And to be honest with you, we just want to stay in the one place at the same time. You know, my wife and I, we save up a lot. We're a double income family, but we still can't even reach the levels of buying an apartment. So that's why my wife obviously got this account. But as Jihi mentioned earlier, it was easy for our parents' generation, right? They could easily buy an apartment. A lot of them still look down on us and go, why don't you have an apartment? Why don't you do that? But it's a different generation that we were living in, like especially during the 1970s when Seoul was very fastly developing. People were owning apartments, and it was, you know, an investment for the future. However, times are changing. We can't buy an apartment these days for most of us. And also, I think many people want to have an apartment because there's some social stigma to not owning your
I was going to mention that because
Yeah.
as you mentioned, the previous generation, our parents and grandparents, they think that it's obvious that once you reach a certain age, you should have your own home. It's stable. You feel the sense of not living like a nomad, as you mentioned. But it's interesting to see what will happen to the next generation, like the Alpha Gen, because even now, amongst our generation, though a majority still want their house because of reality, it's hard for them to land one, then we might see societal changes, you know? We might end up in an era where we don't think that living in our own home is norm. So we'll have to see. And we asked our viewers a similar question on how young people in their country try to buy their own property. Let's see if we can also learn a few tips from them. Take a look at the screen to find out what 3 of them had to say. Graciela Novo said, it's difficult to buy a house in our country. There are loans, but it's not easy to pay it every month. Greetings from Uruguay. SM1354 said, in my country, there are mortgages that cover 100% of the cost of the house. They do not cover the administration costs, and you have to repay them over 30 years. Jiaowei Ki said, usually a lawyer is required and they need payment. You're required to pay a deposit and sign a purchase agreement for houses. You pay the full amount on an agreed date. Make sure you have the money or have arranged a loan with the bank to pay for the house. Thank you to all our viewers who shared their own insight on how to secure your own property. And we're now going to include a fellow millennial in our talks who has been studying real estate and properties here in Korea. We'll add him to our talks right after this. We're going to talk to another millennial who's very interested in buying his own apartment here in South Korea. That's why he's been studying real estate on his own. He even has a realtor's license. It's Cho Deok-jun. Welcome, Deok-jun.
Thanks for having me.
All right, Deok-jun, so you're a fellow millennial here in South Korea. Do you have your own house subscription savings account? When did you first subscribe and why?
Yes, of course, I do have one. My first housing subscription account was made by my parents when I was in middle school. At the time, I didn't know anything about it, but now I feel grateful to my parents. My first attempt at the subscription was around the time I started working. I was planning to make money at work and pay off the mortgage and move into the house when I get married, but I wasn't selected.
I see. There's a feeble chance of getting selected for sure. But as you mentioned, I think I could really relate to the idea of how you were thankful to your parents that they subscribed to you in the first place. And even amongst my friends, we always say thank you so much for our parents for being acknowledgeable to the fact that there is a subscription savings account out there. But the chances seem to be so low. Life doesn't go the way we plan.
Exactly.
Now, would you like to ask the second question?
Sure. I mean, I just want to add one more thing. It's really hard to win the subscription on your first chance as well. I mean, first try. And my question to you is, including yourself, why do you think a lot of young people are getting their hopes up by subscribing to this type of savings account? And what are the chances of actually being selected for a property? I mean, you've tried once.
Housing subscription is a great opportunity to purchase houses at a reasonable price. If you are selected for a popular apartment, you can get a capital gain immediately, called premium or P in short. This is one of the biggest reasons why people are so enthusiastic about it. The odds of winning seem to be low because everyone is interested in the popular apartments. However, many unpopular apartments in non-metropolitan areas such as Daegu, Gangwon remain unsold. So you will very likely be selected if you simply apply. While Seoul's average competition has gone up to 49-1 in the last quarter.
49-1. That's what I'm saying. Not a lot of people are choosing to be subscribed to an apartment that's outside the capital. That's why it seems like the competition is very fierce for apartment complexes here in the capital, right?
Right.
Yes, and some say this isn't a fair opportunity as you need some seed money to even subscribe in the first place and be eligible. What do you think about this?
I don't think it's unfair to give opportunities to people who are ready to purchase houses. But the problem is that the prices of apartments are still too expensive compared to average income level. And the winning score is too high and competitive. In case of an apartment in Yongsan, which is currently under subscription, the sale price exceeds 1.5 billion won. This is amount of saving 50 million won for 30 years. Since people prefer apartments in metropolitan area, only those who with extremely high scores will be selected. So regular social freshmen cannot apply without financial support from their parents. Or even if they have enough money, it is hard to be selected due to the low score. Therefore, the prices of houses have to be low, and the amount of special supply and random supply should be increased. And the issue of metropolitan area crowding is to be resolved by developing countryside or suburban areas.
And as a person with a realtor license, what do you think the advantages of having a house outside of the capital are then?
It's much cheaper, and you can live in very good circumstances like very good air or like good things are there.
Yeah, I know. That's the reason why I decided to move out of the central Seoul area because, like Dr. mentioned, it's clean. It's cleaner, should I say? It's, I guess, less crowded. It's less crowded. It is less expensive than Seoul, but it's still that driving time or the commute time is the thing that always gets me.
I know, for sure. Well, thank you so much, Tokjun. It was a pleasure to hear from you today.
Thanks a lot.
All right, and I'd like to elaborate on what you just said, Walter, because as you mentioned, as Tokjun and you both mentioned, I think the biggest problem with this house subscription saving system is that the competition is particularly fierce near the greater Seoul area, right? But a solution, as he said, could be if we divert our attention to houses and apartment complexes outside of Seoul. You mentioned better air quality, bigger houses, and also, though you have to drive, it could be a better place to raise children, don't you think?
Yeah, I think so. So we're moving to the Anyang area, right, which is the south side of Seoul. It's technically, some argue that it's Seoul, some argue that it's not, but it's the Gyeonggi area. And a lot of people are moving around in that Gyeonggi area.
Right.
If people don't know, the Gyeonggi area is sort of like the white of an egg. So Seoul is the yolk, and Gyeonggi actually surrounds Seoul. So many people are moving outwards that way because it is cheaper in a way.
Relatively.
Yeah, but the commute is sort of annoying because the public transportation in the Gyeonggi area is still relatively good, but obviously not as good as in central Seoul. But people have no choice now. If they can't get these apartments in Seoul, they have to move out to Incheon, they have to move out to Gyeonggi, or sometimes even have to move city completely.
To be very honest, even the Gyeonggi area is quite pricey.
These days it is.
These days it is. So your solution would then be to lower prices and then see better public transport so that more people can head into the yolk of the egg then.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, what about you, Chi-hee? What are your suggestions on providing more housing opportunities for young people then?
Well, Tokjun mentioned that this subscription system is in fact a very good opportunity for people like us to gain a home, but the winning score is too high and the beginning price is too expensive, right? So I guess we need to provide more affordable public housings that will allow young people to actually have a higher chance of winning them, and even if they win them, obtain a house, they can actually pay for them realistically.
Well, that will take a lot more discussions amongst officials, and we'll have to see how things go. In the meantime, we'll be here every day from 9:30 to 10 a.m. Korea time, bringing you more topics young people are talking about. Special thanks to Chi-hee and Walter Lee.
Lovely to be here.
And thank you everyone for watching. We'll see you next week. We are
News Generation.